So let's just go into some of those deep concepts a little bit. So core definitions that you need to know. There are 5 major definitions that I think any marketer, technologist, anyone who's touching Sitecore, of course, developer needs to know, and that's Sitecore Templates, that's Sitecore Content, Sitecore Layouts, Sitecore Components and Renderings, and Sitecore Placeholders. Because the way Sitecore has defined them from the beginning of time is slightly different from the way that we think about them. These concepts have created a lot of confusion early on in processes like discovery meetings, talking with leadership, talking with developers. So I want to clear the air over the next 4 or 5 slides just about these concepts, so we have a clear understanding, so that when I go and we start building things, and I say, okay, we're gonna merge this template with this template, you understand those concepts. So on the left-hand side here, you see, if you Google website template, you'll get a bunch of links and images that have nothing to do with Sitecore's definition of templates. Our traditional thinking in the digital space of, hey, go ahead and go use a template, is this kind of predefined page that's designed, and I can just go quickly swap some things out. In Sitecore, a template has nothing to do with presentation at all. A Sitecore template is simply, really they should have probably called it Sitecore data template. It would probably clear a lot of confusion in the community, but in Sitecore, the templates are simply the values that we're gonna have for content. So an example of an actual template that we use on one of our platforms, like a blog template, for example, we have a blog title, a blog image, the description, the blog date, author, category, tags, is visible. And we have this type here. For those that have never played inside the Sitecore template builder, just to give you an understanding, the field type gives you some definition, right? So I have a blog date, and I can just make this a single line text and force the content editor to put in, with the right construct, like, September 9th, September 10th, 2020, or I can use the date field type so that it's already has a selector, and they can just go ahead and select the date. Same thing comes, like over here, you see an interesting field type called multi-list with search under our concept of tags. And so the multi-list with search, you can see I have a source defined here, start search location with some crazy characters and template here at the end here. And what this is actually telling the system to do is there's a folder sitting inside Sitecore with a bunch of tags that I can apply to a blog page. And those tags are obviously, used functionally so a user can filter or sort through various different articles. And what it's saying to the content editor is the content editor is going to be able to search a tag from a multi-list of items, and the source is telling the system where that list of items is. And so, if you ever go look at your Sitecore templates, this should be, you'll probably see very similar different field types, or maybe possibly different sources that might be defined for you. As I'm going through some of these concepts, feel free to ask questions. I'll definitely come back to them if you want me to dive deeper into some piece. So Sitecore Content is pretty, I think this part everyone can understand, is pretty straightforward. It's the idea that that exact template, those definitions that I created, you can see I have blog title, image, description. Over here, we have blog title, image, description. So these are my fields, my data template, and now I'm putting my actual content within there. You can see like blog date here, it says today, clear, and it's got a date drop down. That's because I selected that date field type. While description, I selected a multi-text, field type, so it's giving me, a big space to add text, while my title is simply a single line text field. So this is how you can define some of these things. And why it's important to understand these concepts is, there's many situations where you may have a Sitecore implementation, and maybe you have a paragraph, a description like this box here, and you want to bold some text, or maybe you want to put some style in there and make the text bigger, or make the text smaller, or make it red or blue, and you keep trying to do it and nothing happens. Most likely it's because your template field definition is just set to like rich text editor, multi-line text versus a rich text editor, which will allow you to do like kind of those Microsoft Word functions that you're so commonly used to. So that's why when we talk about some of these core definitions that you need to know, that's why this is becoming, that's why I think it's very important, especially even at the leadership level, just to understand some of these things, because a lot of times, a lot of problems that you may have with your Sitecore implementation could be just basic configuration or nomenclature issues. So we have Sitecore Templates, again, which is defining this data that I want to put on a page. It has nothing to do with presentation. I then have content that's going to go into this template, this data template. Again, it has nothing to do with presentation. It's just going to be what that content represents or that data is, such as an image or a description. And then that content, what you're looking at here on the right-hand side here is information architecture within Sitecore, right? This is my content tree. I'm sure some of you guys have seen this. I've seen some very pretty content trees. I've seen some very ugly content trees. This content tree represents Icreon.com on our Sitecore 9.2 instance. But you can see that your content tree should just be a logical, like if you're going to organize your file explorer on your computer, or your Finder, if you're Mac, I'm a PC guy, but it's just be an organized way that if anyone that hasn't been with the organization comes into the Sitecore implementation, they can easily find their content. I need to edit this blog, I need to edit this industry, a client page. So this is an example of content organization within Sitecore. As we're going through some of these things, if you are not recognizing a look and feel that you see in this content tree, definitely feel free to reach out. We can talk a little about, because, again, like we talked about in the first session, Sitecore is so robust and pretty much an open canvas that when it comes to implementation, sometimes shortcuts are taken, sometimes best practices are not followed, which make it really complicated to do things like we're going to do over the next 2 sessions, giving you more control over the platform and allowing you to actually build with it. Then we get into Sitecore Layout. I find layout to be very interesting because when you think about layout starts to define our structure, starts to define our website. What would you find in your Sitecore layout? You would find your header defined, your footer defined on the website. You may find some of your CSS include files there, JavaScript references. For the marketers, you're definitely going to find any Google Analytics, Google Tag Management sitting in your default or your main layout. What's very powerful about layout is we all hear those rumors, or when we listen to the big fluffy content saying, headless, 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 put content anywhere, publish once, content goes anywhere, it can go on any device. That's where layout comes in, right? So you can see on this bottom image here, one of our clients, of course, best practice, build a responsive looking website that is going to fit the mobile form or the tablet form. But a challenge that sometimes companies have with responsive design is the way kind of the blocks lay on top of each other when I go to a mobile view. So one of our clients had an issue where you kind of had a text box, image, text box, and the way it came over block in the responsive view didn't logically make sense against the narrative they were trying to say on the page, because it was going image, text. So by creating a separate layout and defining it, so this is a smartphone device that, where the user agent contains Android, where the user agent contains iPhone, where the device type is smartphone, I'm defining, a device and applying my layout to it so that I can actually go and change the look and feel of a page for a mobile layout. Or maybe you wanted to change the look and feel for iWatch, or maybe one of your layouts is going to be for a big 63-inch screen TV. Instead of having this big full width image, you want to have maybe a 50-50 look and feel. So that's where you're going to be able to define those different looks and feels for different forms. It's going to be within layouts when we're starting to build out structure. But again, it's just really the outline structure of your page, my header, my footer, my major page container. It's actually not going to be any of my other presentation layers, like my product selection or my hero image or image, text descriptions or anything like that. That's going to sit at the component and rendering level, which become reusable. The idea of components and renderings are the reusable components that we can use on one page, on another page. It could be with more advanced implementations. It could be on a third-party website that I can reuse that component and shoot it to a beacon on a third-party website so that my content's showing up there. We'll talk about that probably in our next session. But let's look at a component. Before we jump into components layouts, this is an example of a default layout that you're looking at here. This is code that would be in our default layout. And you can see as we look at that, I'm just going to jump real quick to show you an example of the actual layout. can see on this screen here as we go through this layout, we have our Google Tag Manager sitting here, our script sitting here. So as you scroll down, here's my header with some placeholder. Here's my main section. I get into my footer. So it's not like the default layout's this huge file. It's actually quite a minimal file that's starting to just create some definition for the Sitecore implementation for what's going to use this layout. What am I using in terms of models within Sitecore? There's this asset foundation module that we're going to be using that needs to be configured with most implementations. And what assets allows me to do is actually change the look and feel as a marketer, not as a developer. And then that's something we're going to do when we're building it. And so I think it's just important to get, to recognize where this code is sitting. I'm not saying you have to write this code. I'm not a data engineer myself. I kind of just understand, the theory and what certain things mean. And that's important to understanding how certain things are going to work for you and your implementation. I'm going to give you guys a little tip and trick for those that maybe want to look at some of their files. Don't tell your devs that you noticed, but ever since Sitecore, I think 6.4, there's been this backdoor entry to the file repository that sits on your Sitecore implementation. Some implementations may not have access because your developers or your engineers kind of close the door on you. But what's really cool about this is if you really want to kind of see how your Sitecore platform is built, you can go to your shell to this area called File Explorer. I'll just show you a real quick example of what that looks like. And what File Explorer allows you to do is on your, depending on how your infrastructure is set up, if you're separate CM, separate CD, allows you to access the files on the CM server, what's in the Sitecore platform itself. And what's great about that is if you're kind of interested to look at what a view or a rendering looks like, what your config files look like, if you want to change some information around your fonts or upload new fonts, you can access these areas. So the shell default ASP XML control equals File Explorer will give you access to this area, and what allow where it becomes really powerful to see over here on this left-hand side, I got a long list of these views. These are all renderings and components that I can leverage in pretty much any way that I want if you understand these concepts, from header navigation components to blog components. And so most likely you have a section within your implementation called views that's going to contain a lot of these files. And if I truly want to look at, for example, I go to my home here, I can look at some actual HTML and see how a component is built. So perhaps maybe you wanted to add like an H2 tag or an H3 tag to a certain component. This will allow you to see kind of exactly where you can do that, or where you can, where you'll be able to do that. You can download the file. Again, don't tell your devs that I gave you guys this tip, because if you do the wrong thing, you potentially break your instance. But I think it's still a great feature that is available to you guys. So when it comes to those component or renderings, those views that we were talking about, I'm assuming most of you have an MVC implementation over web forms. Web forms was kind of legacy build that Sitecore used that was pretty much deprecated when it came to Sitecore 8. But if you're using web forms still, you need to understand sublayouts, and you're probably using XSLT renderings. We're not going to talk about any of those because I haven't done a web form implementation in some time. But when it comes to MVC, there are two types of renderings that you're going to have in your implementation, guaranteed. There's view renderings and there's controller renderings. Simply put, view rendering, no logic. Controller rendering, there's logic that goes into there. When it comes to actually doing some cool stuff with Sitecore as a marketer that doesn't want to really do any hands-on coding, you want to play with view renderings, because your controller renderings are accessing controllers that are driving logic within the system. So for a case in point example, this is our Icreon website. This is a page called clients. I've got this headline up here, and I got this section down here below. This top piece here is a view rendering. I've got a headline, I've got a call to action. If I wanted to actually change the background color or change the font color, If I wanted to turn this circle into a square, using CSS, I can make all those edits without, really getting heavy into code. But on the controller rendering side, I have logic that's happening here on our website that shows all our clients, and then I can filter those clients by this mechanism, show me all here. So there's logic that's going in there. And so, making a lot of edits as a marketer is going to be a little bit impossible around those controller renderings. So view renderings is where you're going to want to play with when you're building with some of your renderings or playing with some of those things. And then the last definition that you really truly need to know is placeholders. Placeholders is how content editors can add components or renderings to a layout. So in Sitecore, components are added onto a page with these placeholders. You can see this list here. I have a home section, an about us section, case study detail section, client section. And so each one of these placeholders, what typically happens is you see this section called allow controls. Developers or your implementation partner, depending on design, we'll build a placeholder like my home page and say, okay, these are the controls that are on this home page, and I'm going to define it here. Now, if I go to add a new component to that home page, I'm going to be restricted by these allowed controls. And this is one of the big important areas that you should understand, because you may have a rendering or a view rendering sitting on your about page that you want to bring onto your home page, or maybe onto a product page. And you try to do it and you can't. The easiest way to make it possible is just to add the control to the placeholder that exists on that page, and then you should be able to add that rendering. And we'll actually do that in practice. So just to bring it all together, right? We have a default layout. It's going to contain our header. It's going to contain our footer. I'm going to have a placeholder, and we're going to have renderings. They're going to go onto the page. Those renderings have content within them, and that content is defined by that data template. And that is, in essence, how a Sitecore page really gets built, all the pieces of the puzzle.